First of all, thank everybody for having me here today. I appreciate it. I think this is my second appearance before the Rip-On, so I've done some of my old material on you. I can't do the Bud Schuster stories anymore, but I will tell you this, that some days I feel I'm the most fortunate chairman to ever serve on the committee, because I don't have just one chairman I can turn to and talk to. I've got three. But some days I'm the most unfortunate because all three have my cell phone, and they feel they call me anytime they want and tell me what I've done wrong. So it's, you know, it's good and bad, but it's great to be the chairman. I appreciate that my colleagues have entrusted me with that in that position. As Joe mentioned, we're working hard to try to move bills on a bipartisan basis. And I'll say about the ranking member, we've got a good relationship, very good relationship. And quite frankly, Peter's probably the most knowledgeable member in Congress when it comes to transportation. Not only is he smart, but he's been around for a while, so he knows where the bodies are buried. So it's great to have someone that you can learn from, listen to you know, his position on different things. The other thing about Peter, though, is, you know, he gives these passionate speeches on the House floor and in the committee. So a lot of the younger members, we went on a Codell to Panama, they were like, DeFazio's going with us? You know, DeFazio's, is he? I said, no, he's all right. He's all right. And to that point, a couple of them, after the trips, they interacted with Peter on the trip, and they came back and said, yeah, DeFazio's really a pretty good guy. So he's got some new fans on our side of the aisle. The committee is, as it said, we have a lot of work to do, a lot ahead of us. I just want to, you know, from the outset, but you know, my feeling on transportation and infrastructure, there's a federal role involved. It's from the beginning. I know, Peter, you have your prop here? You can show your prop? Got it. Yeah, I'll set up his prop for him to let him know I'm on the same. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Transportation from the very beginning has been a role of the federal government. And I've probably told you this, I'm sure people in this room have heard this before, but you know, the Articles of Confederation, they failed for a number of reasons. The breaking point was a transportation issue. Maryland and Virginia couldn't agree on a treaty to navigate the Potomac to get to western Pennsylvania to the Ohio Territory. So it failed. They came back to the drawing board. Article 1, Section 8 talks about the three main responsibilities of the federal government are common defense, interstate commerce, and establishing post roads. So from the very beginning, I also like to point out the first earmark in Congress was a lighthouse of, I think it was Maine, which it was Massachusetts at the time. So from the beginning, people understood, the Founding Fathers understood that if we wanted to be a prosperous nation, if we wanted to become a nation and connect us, we had to have a transportation system. So, you know, throughout history, I like to point out that the three significant transportation projects in the United States, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Panama Canal, and the Interstate Highway System, were all Republican presidents that pushed those projects forward. So, you know, I don't know why we've given up that mantle as Republicans, but we should claim it back. And I hope the next presidential candidate from our side, you know, if he lays out 5 or she lays out 5 or 6, you know, principles, I hope one of them is to rebuild the transportation system in this country, along with the states and the partnership we've had for years with the states and the locals, because I do believe that's a core function of government. Briefly, just let you know, on the surface transportation bill, we're working very closely with Paul Ryan. We're running out of time, obviously. May 31st or 30th is 22nd, I guess, actually, because we leave town. So we're probably going to have to do a short term, get us through the construction season, and so we're talking with leadership about that now. FAA reauthorization is due this year. I've said many, many times, I think we have an opportunity to do something transformational. I don't want to speak for Peter, but I think we agree there's a problem over the FAA. How we come up with a solution, you know, we're talking about that now, and have been talking about that for the past 16 months. And I believe because everybody involved in it, from the folks, the air traffic controllers, to the manufacturers, to the airlines, everybody wants to see something different over there, see something that works. And so we're engaged with Peter and his staff and my staff talking about it, and we've been engaged with the stakeholders for the last, as I said, 16 months. Pipeline reauthorization bill we'll have to do this year, and my intent is to do another water resources bill, probably next year, but in this Congress, get back to regular orders. So those bills are coming through every Congress. I think it's necessary. As well as we mentioned, passed a FEMA reform bill. A passenger bill came through the House, over 300 votes, bipartisan vote. So there's a lot on the agenda. We're going to be very, very busy. And again, I'm pleased to be here today with Peter to discuss whatever the issues are you want to discuss. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Oregon, who, by the way, I found out also with Peter DeFazio, we've had these sort of mixers on the different subcommittees bringing the industry in, and I found out early on, you got to have good beer or Peter's not happy. So we always make sure we have good beer for Peter.
Life is too short for bad beer. So
now it's on. Life is too short for bad beer. No, Bill's learning, and he's a wine guy. But my real leadership position in Congress is I'm co-chair of that House Craft Brewers Caucus. Greg Walden and I founded it. Greg's moved on to other things, and it's probably outside of transportation, which Bill is helping restore the tradition, but the Craft Brew Caucus is the last truly bipartisan endeavor in the House. It's almost evenly split, 143 members, R's and D's, and it's a huge and growing industry. In my state, it's a $2.3 billion industry. We drink a lot of craft beer. We have the highest per capita consumption of craft beer in the country. So come visit, come drink the beer, visit the wineries. America's fallen apart, and we need to act. It's not just surface. Surface is in deep trouble. 140,000 bridges on the national highway system need repair or replacement. We have about 40% of the pavement national highway system has failed to the point where it has to be totally rebuilt, not just resurfaced. And then we have about a $70 billion backlog in transit to bring our transit systems up to a state of good repair. That's not to build out new transit options to get people out of their cars or give them options to get out of their cars. That's just to bring what exists up to a state of good repair. That's it. In fact, I mean, it's, when I give speeches around the country, I say, it's at the point where, and this is very embarrassing, in the nation's capital, we're unnecessarily killing people on the metro system because of the bad state of repair. And we have to deal with these things. That's the bad news. Good news is we have the strongest Buy America requirements of any sector of the government, much stronger than the Pentagon. So if we make these investments, we will put a lot of people back to work, not just in construction and engineering, but in manufacturing, small business. It has a dramatic multiplier effect across the country when and if we make these necessary investments. This is it's been a challenge over the last number of years, getting to the point of a really meaningful discussion of a true long-term surface transportation bill. And first we had to go through a discussion of this, which is devolution. Now that's a picture from Life magazine circa 1956, and when I first saw it, I'm like, wow, what am I looking at there? It's a little weird. And that beautiful brand new ribbon of concrete is the Kansas Turnpike, and then this odd black area here where it ends rather abruptly. That's Amos Schweitzer's farm field, and that happens to be the Oklahoma state line. And Oklahoma said, if you build it, we'll build it. And Kansas built it, and Oklahoma said, oops, we've got some financial difficulties, we can't build it. So for a few years, until the Eisenhower bill passed and we had federal cost sharing, this is what it looked like. They built a wooden barrier there, people kept crashing through it into Amos's field. He could have made a killing, so to speak, towing people out. He was a very nice guy, towed them out for nothing. He didn't farm that part of the field for a few years, because people just kept going into it. And ultimately we had the Eisenhower bill, and Oklahoma got a match, and they built their section. So there was a little currency. It's finally dissipating, but there were a number of members, got elected in 10, who thought this was a pretty nifty idea. Grover Norquist was pushing it. Let's devolve this to the states. I say, what sense does that make? I mean, first off, it didn't work in the 1950s. It's certainly not going to work in the 21st century in a competitive global environment. And how are you going to coordinate a national system, if you're not, if the federal government isn't engaged? And how would that work if, when all the goods, say, land in LA, so then California and the Port of Los Angeles are responsible for getting those goods to, the Arizona state line? Then what? So I mean, it really made no sense, but it enjoyed some currency. Bill has been educating members, and I don't think there's a lot of adherence to the devolution philosophy anymore. And Senator Inhofe just about a month ago said, Connie Mack and I kind of really pushed this about 15 years ago. He said it was fun then, it's stupid now. And so I don't think we have that hurdle anymore, but we do have the revenue hurdle. And they're going to hold the first hearings in Ways and Means in the near future. He already spoke to what Congressman Ryan has said. I mean, there's a growing recognition we have to make these investments. There are many, many ideas out there on how we can do that. And I think we're gonna act meaningfully and do a good long-term bill. I was a rare Democrat who voted against the so-called Recovery Act, and I urged then Chairman Oberstar to vote the whole committee against the bill. And I said, Jim, if we kill this, we can bring back a bill that makes real investments in infrastructure and really puts people back to work. Most people, again, that sort of drove this. People said, oh, you did that big investment in infrastructure, because Obama kept going around leaning on shovels and saying, hey, look, we're doing all this work. 7% of the whole Recovery Act, under the most generous interpretation of infrastructure, was 7%. And yet 42% was tax cuts that nobody knew they got, which I called the Barista Full Employment Act, a brilliant idea of Larry Summers, which is $12 a week reduction in their Social Security. That didn't put anybody back to work, and my baristas is what I said. Maybe a few baristas get jobs out of that. But if we had done the investments we needed, I think we'd be in a better place today. But it's not too late, and we're going to do that. And as Bill said, we have a even bigger agenda than probably any other committee, meaningful agenda with FAA, Coast Guard, rail safety, et cetera. And water resources. That's one I've worked with. Started, I said, gee, I gotta look up the history here. It was actually his dad who first had the idea in the mid-90s that we do have a revenue source for harbors. And yet, our jetties and harbors are also in a state of disrepair or in need of dredging. And the money which is collected in this tax on imported goods is diverted by the Appropriations Committee, up to more than half some years. So it doesn't get to doing harbor maintenance. And Bud had the idea back then, let's do a trust fund. And actually I started working with Bud in '96 on it. And then Bill delivered about 80% of that dream in the last Congress with a very successful bipartisan Water Resources Development Act. We didn't quite get to totally create a trust fund and put the appropriators, or keep the appropriators' fingers out of that. But it was a fabulous step forward, and I think when we do the bill again next year, maybe we can even take it a little further and get more quickly and more definitively toward a trust-funded approach. So, with that, be happy to take.
So now I got to tell Bud's story.
Oh.
Since Peter brought him up. And the water bills. We passed the water bill on the House floor 417-3. And I was happy about it, and people were patting me on the back, but I walked off and I said to my staff, find out the last time my father passed a water bill, how many votes did he get? So they came back and they said 418. But he had 5 people vote against him, so I took some measure of victory in the fact that I had 3.
Now remember, he had earmarks, which you didn't, so I mean, that was easy to get those votes with earmarks.
Q&A. Joe, you have the rare opportunity of either asking the first or the last question, especially since you did such a great job with the intro.
I'll do the first question. So I know the committees are working fast and furious on a highway bill. Do we think we'll see one this summer?
It all depends on funding, when the funding comes, because the last MAP 21 was 2 years, and that's because we only had enough for 2 years. Paul is committed to finding for a longer-term bill, a 5 or 6 year bill. The speaker is committed to me, and everybody reports in every meeting the speaker has. One of the things he said, we're going to do a long-term highway bill. You know, the Senate wants to do it, the President wants to do it. So it's the funding, and Paul's working on it. I don't think he's going to get the money to us before May, but we need to at least get through the construction season. We'll have to do something to deal with that. But I think this year we'll see a bill.
I can't improve on that, although we might, I might want to go for a little bit more robust funding than Paul's going to be willing to provide.
I'm doing the best I can to push him as far as I can to get as much as we can. And my solution, as I've said to everybody, I don't care where they get the money from, just so we get enough money to do a long-term bill. And you know, these governors around the states and the state DOTs, everybody we talk to, if you give them the option of more money in less time or about the same money in a longer bill, they want a long-term bill. That's critical.
The key with a long-term bill is that you get more, I mean, you get bigger, longer-term projects, which drives more economic benefit for the society, because then contractors will go out and buy new equipment. During the Recovery Act, which were all these shovel-ready, you know, just sort of, nobody bought new equipment, so you didn't get that multiplier effect. You know, I've got a company in my district, JCI, Johnson Rock Crushers, and I mean, they can chart it. I mean, when we get into uncertainty about federal funding, you know, it just, their demand drops off. When a long-term bill comes along, up goes the demand. They get a chart, goes back 30 years.
We sell a lot of SUVs at that same time. So.
Yeah, really. I guess.
Contractors have to get to the job site.
Yeah, interesting. Good. So it has a great multiplier effect.
Ralph Hillman.
Oh yeah, in 1982 Ronald Reagan was proud that he signed a 5-cent increase in the gas tax. He won 49 states just a couple years later. Bill Clinton did the same thing in 1993 and coasted to an easy victory in 1996. Can you talk a little about the gas tax and the idea of Mr. Renacci? You can know it went off to a Ways and Means markup, but you know, indexing the gas tax is one of the reasons the Aviation Trust Fund has been so good, is because the fees are indexed for inflation. What do you think about indexing a gas tax, and how do you think that would fare in your caucus?
Well, aviation essentially is done as a percentage. Most taxes are on a percentage basis and fee, other than some of the flat fees. And so as prices go up, as fuel prices go up, I mean, you know, you get a set amount, but as ticket prices go up, you get a larger amount because it's a percentage basis. You know, we haven't raised it since '93. The estimates are it's worth about probably maybe 60% of what it was in '93 at 18.4 cents because of construction cost inflation. I proposed a number of years ago double indexation, and I've got to talk to the sponsors of that bill. If you go with construction cost inflation, it doesn't get you a lot. It's 0.6 cents a gallon for the next year is what they're estimating. And I looked at double indexation because we're losing ground not just because of the cost of construction, we're also losing ground because cars are going further and trucks are going further, but they're more efficient. So you're getting more road miles and more wear and tear, but actually less revenue. So you also need to index to fleet fuel economy. And if you did double indexation, that would be about 1.7 cents a gallon a year. And I've raised this to my colleagues who are somewhat shy of the gas tax thing. Do you really think you're going to lose your election, you know, if gas prices go up 1.7 cents next year? I said, you know, when I drove by the gas station on the way to work last week, the electronic sign went up a nickel. And, you know, I don't see people out there with pitchforks. You know, so I think that this is the time to do it. Double indexation with bonding could get us a big bang in a 6-year bill.
There's no will in our conference to do that. The president has said, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 years ago. So it's basically, it's not possible to do it. You know, I think that anybody who was around in 1993 or even 1982 would say that they should have indexed it. That was the mistake they made. And as Peter points out, it doesn't solve the problem. So I'm for what's possible. I know Paul says he's going to come up with the money. So my commitment is move to a long-term bill, figure out where the money comes from. The day the president signs the bill, the next day we're going to start talking about how do we fix the funding, because it's going to get worse. I mean, we're all going to be driving cars 50 miles a gallon, electric cars that don't pay anything. So we've really got to start that, and let's get a long-term bill, and let's move on, and then let's start talking about it, so that 5 years or 6 years when the bill we pass expires, we'll have had a conversation. In Pennsylvania, it took them 3 years, and it was a campaign, a grassroots level, plus an advertising campaign for 3 years till they finally were able to change the funding formula. And what they did was lower the fee you pay at the pump. Some, Virginia, I think, eliminated it, and then they put a percentage on a barrel, which is going to get Pennsylvania over the next 4 or 5 years almost $3 billion more. But it took 3 years to do, and when I first became chairman, I got all the groups in, I said, we've got to start talking about this now in one single voice, because everybody's out there and they all want to do something, but we got to have one single voice, and it's hard to do what a state does, and many states have done this. They've gone to the people and explained it to them, and either the people have voted for it or legislators have voted for it. Nobody in Pennsylvania lost who put up that vote for the revenue for transportation. But it's difficult to have 50 states for us to have one single voice to be able to tell the American people. The good news is there's every day I see a story about transportation and the need for it. So people are coming around to it, but it's again, we're just not there yet.
I'd reflect that, and you know, earmarks are part of the problem. You know, congressionally designated spending. So having that, you know, you could say, well, yeah, you're right, I raised your gas tax 1.7 cents a gallon with indexation, but here's the benefits, and by the way, here's some projects I'm going to be doing are going to get done because of designated spending. Right now, I mean, what do? We raise the tax out of people, it goes to the federal government. We let the Secretary of Transportation designate projects under Tiger grants, and the rest of the money goes to the states, where the state DOTs decide where to spend the money. You know, and having, I reformed that process when I chaired the subcommittee. I said, anybody want, you know, everybody has to have earmarks in by, it was like March 1st. You have to show it's consistent with your state transportation plan. You have to show, you have to have letters of support from affected jurisdictions, local officials, county officials, and I'm going to post them all on the internet. You have to sign affidavits, you know, showing that you have no interest in this of any sort. And you know, they were reformed, and I mean, there was 10 times as many proposals as we were going to fund. It was a small percentage of the Safety Blue bill. I think it was 7% of the bill went to designated projects by members of Congress. But that helps. It really does help get people past that reluctance when they go home and actually point to something that is going to happen in their district, Democrat or Republican. So, you know, that's part of it. I proposed also an index barrel tax. Barrel tax, really easy to collect. You just collect it as the oil flows into the refinery, and you tax only the fraction that's going to go to surface transportation uses, and just collect it right there. And the proposal I put in would eliminate the retail gas tax. I thought maybe that would get some people, if they could go home and say, hey, I did away with the retail gas tax, and we're doing the barrel tax here. And there's an interesting study from RAND that there's potential, because of the way oil markets work, speculators work in the oil markets, et cetera, that the oil companies couldn't pass through 100% of the barrel tax, that they would have to eat some percentage of it. So we would actually start to get OPEC and the big oil companies helping to pay a little bit for our infrastructure, which would be a pretty good result. So that would be an interesting way to go in the future. The other quickly would be vehicle miles traveled. Oregon you know, did a pioneered project which was very unrepresentative because it was Earl Blumenauer's district, and that doesn't represent my district. You know, if you're going to do vehicle miles traveled and you're going to do it in a fair way, you're going to have to do it real time, because you shouldn't charge someone you know, the same amount of money in Portland to get on 205 at rush hour as you charge a farmer in Burns to drive 20 miles to feed store per mile. So, but then when you start tracking people, then you know, there's a lot of concerns about privacy. So I hope we do give authority to states to do pilot projects that are on a large scale with vehicle miles traveled, and allow them to keep the federal gas tax or something as an incentive to do that.
Good question. You both mentioned the improved efficiency of vehicles, but on the horizon are automobiles or buses that would pilot themselves. What are the ramifications of that in constructing roads And also, what are the ramifications, say, for mass transit, if you could go from Washington to, say, New York and read a newspaper in your own car?
I've been in the Google car and the Carnegie Mellon car. It's amazing technology. It's coming. And one of the things that I'm going to propose is we put a title in the highway bill to start to think about how do you build a road for that guy. And I have no idea. We need to study it and decide the different materials that need to be in the road so that the sensors pick up the. I don't know the answer to it. And in fact, Pennsylvania has contracted Carnegie Mellon to do just that. They're over a 3-year study. So the roads we build in the next 5 to 10 years, those cars are going to be on it. They tell me probably 5 to 7 years you'll start to, elements already show up in the fleet of this technology. They believe probably 7 years from now, I think they predicted that you'll be able to go into a showroom and buy a car. It's going to be a high-end car. You're going to pay $15,000 more, but it'll be able to drive itself. And they believe within 20 years, 75% of the fleet will be, and that's where you really get when the cars start to talk. Congestion will be alleviated, safety will be dramatically improved. So again, we need to start to think about that.
Yeah, think about when you're sitting at a light and the clowns in front of you is on the cell phone or whatever, and the lights changed, and then, you know, am I going to blow the horn? But if you watch,
I bet you blow the horn.
I did grow up in Massachusetts. Blowing the horn is the polite way of communicating. So, anyway, but if you notice that effect down the road, with the Google car, it uses LiDAR and it can see when the first car starts to move. So if you had a whole line of cars that were equipped with that technology, all the cars would start to move very smoothly all at the same time. And just think of how much congestion you could mitigate with that. That's just one small aspect of it. I mean, it's incredibly exciting technology, and you know, I think that you know, we will, you know, see it in the not too distant future.
The car that I saw that I rode in, it was the Carnegie Mellon car. It won the DARPA contest to have a autonomous vehicle to be able to drive itself. And I went out and I saw the car that won. It was a Chevy Blazer. It had so much technology in it, you couldn't get a human being in the car. It had a bubble on top, it had antennas on all corners, it had sensors hanging off it. So 7 years later, just 7 years later, I go and see the car. It's a Cadillac, the small SUV, I don't know what that is, an SRV or something like that. And this is it looks like a regular car. There's no bubble on top, there's no antennas. And so I said, and there's 4 people get in the car. The Secretary of Transportation said, we can get 4 sets of clubs in here too and go golfing. But I said, okay, where's the brain? They open up where the spare tire would normally go, and I said, okay, that's a weakness of this car. It doesn't have a spare tire. And he said, well, it doesn't need it because it has run-flat tires. So the car is completely functioning, and it's amazing technology. In 7 years, it went from you couldn't get a human into it till we drove 35 miles on a highway.
Hi, David Lapidus with American Apparel and Footwear Association. I'd like to bring the focus to ports for a minute. Thank you so much for your work on untangling the West Coast ports crisis in recent months. As you know, the West Coast dock workers and their management basically held American industry hostage for nearly a year. And from around October to February, it was near gridlock conditions in the West Coast ports because of their labor dispute. You know, as you know, this is not yet over. They haven't yet ratified the contract. They're expected to, but in a few short years, the West Coast Dock Workers contract is going to be up again in 2019, while the East Coast Dock Workers contract is up in 2018. And there's potential for those 2 negotiations to coincide. So we may be facing the same exact situation that we were just in, except on both coasts at the same time. So I would, you know, urge your continued attention to that matter, and also ask if there's plans for any oversight or reform of some kind, so that we aren't facing the same situation again.
Well, you mentioned oversight. That doesn't fall in our committee. The labor laws fall under education and workforce, so we don't have that oversight. But you know, it needs something that needs to be addressed. The market's going to address some of it. Those folks on the West Coast are going to, when the Panama Canal opens up, they're going to ship through, and they're going to go to the Port of Houston or wherever in the East Coast ports where they can get their cargo offloaded. So I think those folks, workers that figure out how to make sure that they continue to operate. And we've already seen, and I believe Mexico is building a port, which is supposed to be a mega port south of San Diego. It's going to be easier to go there. They already go to the Port of Vancouver in Canada because they find that it's much more efficient, less costly to go to this port. So, it's something we need to pay close attention to because it's not right that we shut down the economy of the United States. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I got quite frustrated. Last weekend I was home and I went in the local store and because I had to replace a screen which the dog had run through on the sliding patio door, and he gets very anxious when he wants to go outside. So anyway, the guy says, I don't have any screen. I said, well, you don't have any screen? He says it's in a container somewhere. It's, I mean, I'm short a lot of stuff that's it's still backed up. I mean, I got to the point where we had an even bigger problem, which related to the Port of Portland, which compounded that West Coast problem. And I signed a letter with, I think, at least Kurt Schrader, I can't remember what other members of the delegation, suggesting the president look at invoking Taft-Hartley. Upset the longshoremen a bit, but I said, look, I mean, there's a point of unreasonableness, and here, and I mean, the whole thing in LA came down to they really wanted to get rid of one guy who was in a position as an arbitrator, and they really that's drug it out for a long time, and so I just said, the president might have to come in and settle this. So that tool does exist for presidents willing to use it. But our bailiwick here is we've got to deal with port infrastructure. We've got jetties that are failing that are critical. We've got to do dredging for the post-Panamax ships. So it all goes back to WARDA, Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and getting that critical work done.
One last question. No, I had some hands up over here somewhere. Anything else? Oh, go ahead, Al.
We haven't touched on drones, which is another very exciting technology, and some concern in the technology industry that the U.S. is perhaps maybe losing some ground to other countries that are making it easier to do experimental testing, and could ultimately cede some ground to other countries in terms of our leadership in this technology. And if you could just talk a little bit about maybe oversight of the FAA on drones and your thoughts on that.
Well, we've held several hearings. I've talked personally with the administrator. We had one early hurdle that we got past about the so-called Anti-Deficiency Act, and we don't want to know about it, with his lawyers. But then we thought we gave pretty broad authority to the administrator, but the opinion of his attorneys is that we didn't give him the capability of doing categorical exemptions. They have now gotten through individual exemptions, and they're figuring a way to broaden them. So, for instance, if they license someone to do use a drone for inspection of vineyards, then now they do think they'll be able to, anybody can just piggyback on that application, so they're not going to have to go through the whole individual application process. So there's been some improvement, but I think we're going to need to take further action. The key thing is, we've got to maintain the safety and integrity of the system, but the incidents that have happened are all idiots who are playing with toys that are too easily accessible. And with the problem is, you've got people who, people used to build little, I mean, when my brother built these things out of balls of wood, and you put tissue paper on them, and you put a little engine on it, and and started up they started very reluctantly. So people were very skilled in the model aircraft area until very recently, and they have a strong, presence and lobby, and they're responsible people. They know the rules, where they can fly, where they can't fly, and that. But when all these little toy drones for $1,200, you can get a quadcopter that can go, to illegal levels, and it can, perform, and it can fly into the White House, as one did with a drunk, whoever that guy was. So You know, I think that we're going to have to take some action, and I think we can solve that pretty simply and just say any of these things have to have built into their software that it can't go above 400 feet, and you geofence every restricted area in America, and it's all programmed in. And if you have one of those things that doesn't have that, we're going to find the heck out of you, or we're going to confiscate it. And then they can go play with their toys, but only in places that comply with the law, in ways that comply with the law. Then you have to get to all of the commercial uses, and I think that's much easier, and we could do much better. Right now, FAA is limiting the line of sight. You know, we've got to get beyond that very quickly. I mean, we want to use them in forestry, forest fires. We want to use, I mean, we want pipeline safety, rail safety potential. I mean, the applications are just phenomenal, and we've got to move more quickly. So I think Congress needs to address these issues as part of the FAA reauthorization, give very explicit authority, and get a little bit into the weeds about dividing up the world into, you know, toys, you know, model aircraft people, you know, the new problems with toys, and then over here into broadening the authorities for commercial uses.
You know, Peter's right about it. We're moving far too slow. We need to make sure safety is paramount, and we need to take a close look at it. And again, because he's demonstrated all the knowledge he has on all these different topics. But Congress is looking at it very carefully. And to a broader question, you know, not just drones, but there are manufacturers in this country that, one in particular makes a premier business jet. It has they told me they have a 3-year head start on their foreign competitor. And because the FAA can't get through the certification program fast enough, they're losing ground. Their competitor is catching them. And if we keep screwing around with the certification program, our American company is going to be right in. They're going to be neck and neck in this with the other companies do business jet. So those are the kinds of problems when you talk about the FAA. It's not just airlines, it's manufacturers and people that make the equipment. They can't get it certified. When you go to rebuild an aircraft, I was at an event in a round table with a bunch of folks that deal in the general aviation field. They're taking their planes, this gentleman has a business to rebuild these planes. They're taking it to Germany because the process to get it certified to rebuild it takes them 2 weeks. In the United States, it could take them 6 months or longer. You know, if Germany is beating us, I mean, we're in serious trouble if our agency can't help our manufacturer, can't help American industry to stay out ahead of the pack when it comes to competition. So.